If you'll bear with me for a Matt Foley motivational speaker homage, my name is Rusty Krim. I am 29 years old, and while I don't live in a van down by the river, I am single. Now, if you're not single, let me just congratulate you because it is rough out there. I've spent the last 15 years of my life dating in the hopes of finding the woman that I might one day call my wife. And in those 15 years, I made a lot of mistakes, and I've seen a lot of weird stuff. I dated my college band director's daughter. I took an ex-girlfriend on a date to Cracker Barrel on Valentine's Day and paid with a gift card. I joined an online dating service. That was weird. That was not great. There's a lot of pressure on us single folks, especially in the Christian community, to find someone to settle down with. And if I'm being completely honest, there are days when I'm not sure if I want to get married. Now, I have nothing against marriage itself. I mean, in fact, I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. But I do enjoy the freedom that singleness allows me. I can go where I want and do what I want whenever I want, and that is a good feeling. Of course, there are also days when I can't stand the fact that I'm single and just wish that magical, perfect woman would just beam down Star Trek style so I could finally have someone to binge watch House of Cards with because I'm only at the beginning of the second season. Sorry, got off topic. Intellectually, I know that the tension between my desire for singleness and my desire for a relationship is okay, and that one isn't better than the other. I also want to say up top here that no phrase bums me out harder than the phrase Christian singleness. To me, that phrase carries the baggage of the narrative that your ultimate goal as a person is to find someone who will complete you, right? Or be your soulmate or perfect match or whatever. Again, there's nothing wrong with getting married. But hearing things like those statements and their accompanying messages not only bums me out, but some people take it very personally, especially people who are having real trouble finding that person. This line of thinking not only implies that you're only complete if and when you find that perfect spouse, but it's also theologically incorrect. No person will complete you, and you are not unlovable or a failure if you don't find a spouse because, and I think Jesus and Paul and a host of other people would agree with me here, our marriages and relationships are secondary, always secondary, to our calling as Christians to spread the gospel. And this isn't just me saying this either. This idea is scriptural. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 gives us a perfect picture of what I'm talking about. Now, as Dr. Hume, my New Testament professor, so eloquently puts it, when we read Paul's letters, we are reading other people's mail. They're all applicable to us, and they're all useful to us, but ultimately they were not written to us here in 2016. And it's important to contextualize that. So with that in mind, let's do that for a second and contextualize 1 Corinthians. Remember that Paul was taught by the disciples not long after Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. So, although Paul wasn't around for Jesus' final instructions, the disciples would have more than likely told him about their final encounter. I mean, after all, their last questions to him, the last question to him was when he planned on returning and restoring Israel, to which Jesus said, "It is not for you to know the time or dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And that was Acts 1:7-8. So now, Paul is working under the same assumption that the disciples were, that Jesus was returning within a generation to restore Israel and bring his kingdom to earth. So this explains the haste with which Paul moves around throughout the book of Acts on his missionary journeys. I mean, after all, if he only has a couple of years to spread the gospel, there's no time to waste. Which brings us to the Corinthians. The Corinthians, by Paul's own admission, were a highly intelligent church, but they had begun bickering about whose teachings were correct. Paul, Apollos, Peter. They had all been taught by these guys and others, and were now trying to parse out who to follow. Does it sound familiar? It's a different setting, but it's the same problem we have today. They, like us, had become more focused on the doctrine espoused by these different teachers rather than the gospel message itself, that Jesus paid the atoning sacrifice so that we might join our Maker in heaven for eternity. Jesus came to save everyone, and instead of focusing on that, the Corinthians were more focused on which teacher said that message the right way. Which brings us to chapter 7, wherein Paul addresses the idea of marriage. Now, it's worth noting that Paul is very careful in this passage to indicate when what he's saying was told to him divinely and when what he's saying is purely his own opinion. He offers up many thoughts and many rules in this chapter, but 40 verses is a lot. So let me just give you the TLDR version, the too long didn't read version. Marriage is hard. Singleness is hard. One of them works better for you. Do that one. It's an oversimplification, to be fair, but it's not totally inaccurate. See, Paul, throughout these 40 verses, keeps bringing up two main points. Jesus is coming back, and you have a job to do. He constantly refers to their calling, the calling to spread the gospel, because, again, if they only have a couple of years to tell everyone, then they had better get to work. He tells them explicitly in verses 26 through 28, because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. Today, this sounds kind of like a duh statement, but think about what this meant in the first century. The only way to secure your legacy was through marriage and having children. And Paul openly advocates for these Christ followers to reject that idea. He's not telling them to, but he's suggesting pretty hard that they remain unmarried and unattached. Don't secure your legacy. Don't have a family. But why? Why would he tell them this? The answer is in verse 35. In verse 35, he says, I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undevoted devotion to the Lord. He's saying our calling is not to marriage. Our calling is not to a spouse, a family, children, anything like that. Our calling is to follow Jesus and spread the gospel. Now, can you do that with a family? Absolutely you can. Can you be a loving, devoted husband or wife and a devout Christ follower? Of course you can, without a doubt. But the key here is that our relationships, be they dating, marriage, family, whatever, they are all secondary to our calling as Christians. And just in case you're one of those, well, Paul isn't Jesus, so I'm going to pay less attention to him people, you might remember that Jesus says in Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Now, of course, you should love your family, but Jesus' larger point is just beneath his statement. Our calling as Christians comes first. The gospel precedes all of our relationships. Now, I don't know how long I'll be single. For all I know, I could walk out my door after I record this and find the woman of my dreams. I could also not. Neither one is wrong, but one of them is right, if that makes any sense. I can either remain single or find a wife, but either way, my calling as a Christian to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ comes first, before everything. Being married is hard. Being single is really hard. One of them works better for you. But regardless of which one works better for you, you're a disciple first, and you have a job to do.